The next thing that we'll see is Settoproperty. So before knowing what is Settoproperty, we should have an understanding about test object and the runtime object. Now suppose this button, as you can see in the application, we call this button as the runtime object. Then the corresponding test object is the object which is added in object repository. If you see, for the runtime object flight button, we have a test object stored in object repository. So this is the difference between runtime and test object. Now you know that when we write get arrow property, we get the runtime property, that is the property which is at runtime. So at runtime the button can be enabled or disabled. So depending on that we'll get the value. But there's one more thing, that we can set the test object property using Settoproperty. So for this button, suppose if you see the runtime, when I run the script, the runtime object property will be the flights button is disabled. So what I can do is, when I use Settoproperty, I can change this property. So the syntax is Settoproperty. In double quotes you write the property name, that is enabled, and comma, and in double quotes again you write the property value. Now we are setting the test object property. So when I'm changing the test object property, I can what I'll use is, I'll change it to enabled true. Currently it is disabled, so enabled is false. So I'll change this property to true. Now what QTP will do is, when it runs this line of code, it will set the test object property, that is the property of this flight button over here, enabled to that is the property enabled, to value true, whereas in the application the runtime property is false. So what I'll do is, also remember that when you set the test object property, it is valid only till the action runs, till the completion of the run. So once the action run completes, this value will be as it was earlier, and the new value, that is enabled true, won't be effective after the script run ends. So now how do I retrieve? Once I set the property, I can retrieve the run property by using getToProperty. That is get test object property. Since it is not the runtime object property, that is, it is not the property of this button. It is the property of this button which we have saved in object repository, that is the test object. So to retrieve this value, we'll write get test object property, and in bracket and double quotes you have to just write the property name. So I display this value, and when I run it, let's see what happens. So I'll just right click on the code and run it from this step directly.